Before we start, I would like to say that there will be some post-Wano spoilers in this video, so if you are not caught up with the manga, you have been warned. The topics that we'll be covering today are comparing Rocksteady Xebec to Buggy. Following, we're going to compare Luffy to Buggy and how they stack up to Roger and Xebec. Following that, we're going to talk about Teach and Shanks and how they compare to Roger and Xebec. And then we're going to end with some trivia thoughts about Buggy and how his character will be moving forward. With that being said, let's get started. When comparing Xebec to Buggy, a few things stand out to me in terms of appearance. Both of them have their mouths open with a mane of long flowing hair. You see this with Buggy in the 4 Yonkos color spread and his One poster where his mouth is open and he has a long mane of flowing hair in the back. Now, I think Rock's official appearance will be him with a clown nose, as well he has been so far depicted in silhouette. And silhouette is often to mislead the viewer into thinking a character looks one way when they actually look completely different, or some details are added that weren't too obvious in the initial silhouette. So here I think he'll actually have a clown nose, which will immediately make people think of Buggy whole stop. Now, in terms of recruitment, Buggy and Xebec are kind of interesting because Xebec, I think, just based off what we see with Kaido, like a young Kaido in his flashback, I don't think Xebec actually went out and sought individuals. As you know, Kaido was basically talent scouted by Newgate, and I think people were just drawn to Xebec via his pure charisma. The same thing has happened with Buggy, as after his defeat by Luffy, he never recruits anyone ever again. Individuals either seek him out or are just drawn to his natural charisma. You see this with Alvita. She sought him out. He and Mr. 3 become blood brothers in prison, so he doesn't ask Mr. 3 to join his crew. Mr. 3 just comes along. After that, some happenstance actually gains him through one way or another. Crocodile and Mihawk supposedly under his employ. He did not seek these individuals out to join his crew. Happenstance just made it so that public opinion makes it appear that these two are working for Buggy. This is interesting because currently Buggy has 2 very important people under his employ. They are world fixtures. Crocodile is a big underworld's boss now after escaping Impel Down, and Mihawk has always been the world's strongest swordsman as far as we have known him in the story. So this compares to the various amount of heavy hitters that Rox had it in his employ back in the day. What's also very interesting is that Buggy is directly related in terms of narrative significance to a former Rocks pirate, Captain John, because as you know, he was searching for his treasure for a long time until Luffy gave him the treasure map and Impel Down. When comparing Buggy to Luffy narratively, no example is greater than what happens in Chapter 17. In Chapter 17, when Luffy tells Buggy that he is going to be king of the pirates, Buggy pauses and then responds angrily, saying that if he's going to be king of the pirates, Buggy shall be the god of the pirates. This is very interesting because it's not presented as a dream, but it's very comparable to when, say, characters like Kobe or Momonosuke respond to Luffy's dream of being king of the pirates with their own dreams of being a high rank official in their respective mediums. For example, Kobe wants to be an admiral, and then Momonosuke wanted to be the shogun of Wano. This is also very interesting when you consider Goldie Roger and Rocksteady Xebec. Goldie Roger became the king of the pirates. However, Rocksteady Xebec wanted to be king of the world. With king of the world and god of the pirates, these are the only 2 stations in the series mentioned that are higher of an acclaim than king of the pirates, which is a very interesting thing to take note of in terms of narrative. Also, when talking about narrative and discussing Luffy versus Buggy, Buggy is the only person to attack Luffy's Straw Hat, and his 3 slash mark scar on that straw hat is the second longest lasting scar in the series, the first being the scar Luffy gives himself in chapter 1. When comparing Luffy to Buggy, another interesting point are their abilities. Luffy and Buggy were once both considered paramecias, however, as we know that changed. Luffy and Buggy can also extend their limbs out as a main draw of their abilities. Another interesting point is that both of them ate their fruits at very young ages, and Shanks, in one way or another, was the cause of them eating their respective fruits. Later on, which is very interesting, in Impel Down, we get a very formal explanation to how Buggy's powers work. He generates a localized room as long as his feet are on the ground, and that allows his limbs to fly around freely, which is very interesting. The arc after, in Marineford, a very interesting scene happens that I think is played up for jokes, but might give us insight to see that Buggy's powers, much like Luffy's, are more than they seem. Buggy is cut by Mihawk 3 times. The third time, he's cut into ribbons. Mihawk pauses at this as it seems very strange to him, only for Buggy to simply regenerate and yell at him. This makes me believe that Buggy might be a bit more than he lends on to be, because there's no doubt that Mihawk was using Haki during that time, as Marineford is one of the arcs that could be seen as the birthplace of when Haki really started rolling as a concept in One Piece, because shortly after that arc, we get not one, but several explanations about how Haki works. Joke or not, I find it very interesting and very telling that Buggy's powers are this absolute, to the point where the strongest swordsman in the world could not cut him. No matter if he was using Haki or not, to be honest, the statement is still there in the narrative. Not even Mihawk could cut Buggy. So therefore, Buggy's abilities so far have been proven to be absolute, as no one is able to cut him. That's something to think about. When comparing Teach and Shanks to Roger and Xebec, here's my controversial take. Teach and Shanks are LARPing. They are pretending. They are not the inheritors of Xebec and Roger's will, because there are several things they do that Roger and Xebec don't do. For example, number 1 being plotting and scheming. Shanks and Teach have been plotting and scheming the entire story. You see this with Teach's whole backstory of being on Whitebeard's crew and waiting around for the Yami Yami no Mi to show up and all that. You see this with Shanks in bits and pieces, as it's been presumed that giving Luffy the Gum Gum fruit was not a mistake, or taking the Gum Gum fruit from Who's Who was not a mistake, or meeting with the Gorosei to discuss a certain pirate. These things are things that Roger and Xebec have shown so far not to do. They are men of their own morals, and things just happen for them, and people are just attracted to them. Not the case with Shanks and Teach. Even as far as recruitment goes, you can see this in both of them. A little less in Shanks, but a lot more so in Teach. With Shanks, the only recruitment scene that we have is him actually going out of his way to find Yasopp because of his sniping abilities. So again, he goes out of his way to find this particular person to join his crew. Teach does the same thing. As a warlord, he breaks into Impel Down with the sole purpose of recruiting some guys on level 6. He gets more than he bargains for, because he also gets one of the former wardens of Impel Down, but still, he goes out of his way to find particular people that he wants. He even goes so far as to host a mini tournament in level 6 in order to get the best of the best out of that particular area. These are things that Buggy and Luffy just don't do. And as far as we know, these are things that Xebec and Roger do not do. People in both cases, with Xebec and Roger and Luffy and Buggy, are just drawn to their charisma. You see this a lot, of course, with Luffy because he's the main character. People just plop themselves in his path. He'll hear about a guy, and that guy will just show up, and then circumstances will happen, and then he would then invite said person onto his crew. But otherwise, no, he doesn't go out and seek individuals for his crew. Therefore, whatever Buggy and Luffy have inherited from Xebec and Roger, Shanks and Teach simply do not have it. There's a trivia section where I explain the familiar ties between Buggy and Xebec and also give out some tidbits about Buggy. So, as you know, Roger and Garp have a high respect for one another. Roger allows Garp to look after his pregnant wife and also to raise Ace because he trusts him like he would trust one of his own crew. Therefore, he gives Garp permission to raise Ace. Now, this very much could well be the same case for Roger and Xebec because it's stated that Xebec was one of Roger's greatest rivals. And then you see this trickle down through the crew as everybody except for Big Mom, who seems to be on the fence about Roger, has a very, very high respect for Roger. Shiki has a high respect for Roger and even went out of his way to fight Sengoku and Garp because Roger was executed. Newgate has an extremely high regard for Roger as well. Therefore, it's to be said that perhaps Roger and Xebec had a very similar agreement, and this is where Roger got the idea in the first place to have someone raise his son for him, and that someone being a great rival, because Xebec most likely gave Roger the permission to raise Buggy as one of his own with the hopes of him becoming a great pirate under Roger's supervision. Another very interesting tidbit is how Buggy and Teach are treated by the older generation, like Roger's generation, because Roger, even in the Oden flashback, is a weirdly gentle parent, as when Buggy wants to steal the golden bell from Skypiea when the boys go up there, Roger puts him down easy and says, no, Buggy, we're not here for that. However, when you become a captain, you can come back and steal that golden bell whenever you want. That's so funny to me because he's encouraging his boy to become a pirate captain. I just find that fascinating. And then Whitebeard, when he meets Shanks for the first time in the present, Whitebeard looks upon Buggy very fondly and asks Shanks about him. I find that fascinating that he remembers this supposed insignificant kid on his rival's crew and thinks about him very fondly. This scene is then extended into Marineford when Whitebeard gives Buggy an offhanded compliment as to say, oh yeah, these Marines are a bit trouble for me as well. Why don't you and the boys lend me a hand here? I find that very funny, and it's shown to be genuine because Marco asks him about it and he says, well, I'm not too certain about Buggy, but those subordinates that are piling around him could prove to be useful. I find that fascinating because when you compare this to Teach, he is dogged out at every opportunity by the older generation. When he's actually staring down Whitebeard has this entire speech about Teach not being the one Roger is waiting for, and he will not be the one to find One Piece. That's fascinating in itself. And then in the post-Wano stuff, like the time between Wano and Egghead, Rayleigh rolls up on Teach as he's invading Amazon Lily and simply says, I remember you. You are Whitebeard's apprentice. I never liked you. You suck. I find that so funny because it's such an interesting thing that Buggy was such a loser for a grand sum of the story, yet all of these people that knew him back in the day still look at him fondly, even Shanks. And then despite all that Teach has accomplished, nobody cares. I just find that fascinating. But give me your thoughts. Some additional notes before I go into what I think Buggy will turn out to be in the future. If you notice, Buggy's longest makeup trend, like the makeup he wears as part of his whole clown getup, is the X on his forehead. He keeps that for the longest, and I think he departs from it one time when he has like green circles on his face. But yes, this is the longest running makeup trend that he has. He shares this with Luffy because in the post time skip, Luffy's scar is in the shape of an X. So both of these characters have a sort of X marks the spot theme. And to be funny again, if you really want to dig deep, Xebec's name, at least in the Viz translation and in the Funimation dub, his name starts with an X. Don't know about the official romanization of his name, but so far I'm taking what Viz and Funimation says as gospel as far as I'm concerned. So yes, Xebec also has an X in his name. I don't know what that means, but hey, X marks the spot. Moving forward with Buggy, I think his faction, the Cross Guild, is probably going to be one of the most important factions in One Piece. I think they're going to be right behind the Blackbeard Pirates in terms of importance, because here's the thing with Buggy's Cross Guild versus like the red-haired pirates. We know everyone in Buggy's Cross Guild. We've known them for 10 years. We have just got names for a lot of the red-haired pirates. We know bits and pieces about them, but in honesty, they're kind of just strangers to us. We want to see what they can do, and I'm sure that'll be very exciting. But we know the characters in Cross Guild personally. They've been in several arcs. They've done many things. We know who Buggy is. We know who Crocodile is. We know who Mihawk is. We know who Das Bones is. We know who Galdino is. We know Alvita. We know Moji. We know Richie. We know Kabaji. These guys have been around forever. I think the likely thing is, just because of how Mihawk has been developing into more of a character over the time skip, I think it's very likely that he'll train Kabaji and Mr. One to be more of top-notch officers in this now newly ordained Yonko crew, because it just makes sense that the master swordsman will train the lesser swordsman. That might be a little out of reach, but it would make sense. Also, I think his relationship and Crocodile's relationship with Buggy will shift, because their introduction does remind me of a funny scene that you would usually get between Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, where Luffy is getting beat up by Zoro and Sanji for being stupid. I think that's going to change into more of a comrade relationship between Mihawk, Crocodile, and Buggy. And if you want to know, yeah, Crocodile is the Sanji in this situation. What that may entail of, I do not know, because both of them are very involved with Ivankov. One of them respects Ivankov, one of them is afraid of Ivankov. So we'll see where that goes. But otherwise, yeah, I do think all the characters are going to get a power-up. I do think what might shift the ties is when Mihawk and Crocodile find out where Buggy's lineage comes from, because I think Buggy can only fail up from this point. So we're going to see how that is handled. But other than that, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Also, check out the Discord. Thanks again. See you next time. If you like stuff like this, please feel free to check out my YouTube channel, Pauly P Works. And if you like what you see, I would appreciate your subscription. Thank you so much. See you next time.